Alright, want a net?
Look at the size of this dude.
Want a net?
He's a flipper.
Sometimes the difference between catching a skunk and catching trout is which side of the boat you cast from.
Oh, that's a big one.
It's just like when Jesus acted as a fishing guide for Peter and John. He told them to cast their nets on the other side of the boat, and the result was a catch so big it started sinking the boat. When we cast in all directions around the boat, we call it fan casting, and it's a way to probe for shoals of feeding trout. In this video, I want to discuss localized movement of trout and share some examples of fishing from Thanksgiving week. But first, let's go back to my last fishing video along the wall in Chalmette. When we rolled up, there was a boat anchored and the guy was fishing toward the rocks. I didn't see him catching, but he was pretty surprised when we suddenly started hammering the trout on the other side of his boat. I'm not judging that guy, I'm just making a point that trout can be feeding nearby and we may never know. During the week of Thanksgiving, we had a nice morning catching trout along the MRGO rocks near the Great Wall of Chalmette. When we started, the trout were formed up near the rocks, and we were catching them from about 5 to 7 foot depth. Within an hour, we were catching them well off the rocks and in 10 to 12 foot of water. We have learned from experience that when the bite dies down, one of us should always turn around and fan cast on the other side of the boat. This action has many times recentered us on a shoal of trout.
Speckled trout. Nice one, John. That is a mule.
Big fish. So the water temperature is 57 degrees. We've been working it a little, right there. Working the bait a little slower than I would typically. We both have 3/8 ounce. You've got a lemon head matrix shad. I have a pink champagne. So both light colors.
Nope. Oh, nice one, John.
Another decent fish here. Oh, come here.
That.
No. It's okay. They're not real aggressive. The last couple I just had tension on the line. I'm telling you.
Ooh. Pretty trout.
These guys.
That's a nice one.
Nice trout there. These guys are not hammering it.
No, they're not. How are you working your lure?
Just barely moving it, just letting it sit, barely moving it. And that's a beauty right there.
Gorgeous. Look at all those spots too.
Look at that.
Fat.
That's a nice trout. Yeah, I used to fish this ultraviolet all the time.
Yeah.
It used to be my go-to bait for this wall area. Speckled trout will make micro moves within an area as conditions change. One changing condition on this day was the intensifying sunlight. On sunny days like this, with clear, calm water, sunlight will penetrate much farther into the water. This light intensity may make the trout feel vulnerable to predation and move them from the shallower water near the rocks to deeper water nearby. Here's another example of trout moving due to changing conditions. Well, this is the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and there's a lot of fishermen today. There were a lot of boats on the road coming down for sure, but we're here at a community spot, the south side of the dam in the MRGO. And there's a lot of trout being caught. A lot of fishermen here. There were a lot of fishermen out, as you know if you were out Friday or Saturday. And the boats were lined up along the dam, plus there were fishermen on the dam. Basically everyone had a slot in which they could fish. And as bad as that sounds, I have to say that everyone stayed cordial. Not just cordial, but helpful. People shared tips on catching and even shared baits. And I didn't hear any angry shouts or tangled lines. So to everyone who was there, great job. Go, decent fish. Oh yeah. Decent sized trout. So we're starting out jigging 1/2 ounce lead heads. David's doing well with the green hornet matrix shads. Nice. Besides the catching, what I found interesting was where the trout were being caught. Initially, the water was strongly pushing through the dam, and the boats were anchored in 20 to 25 foot of water. My observation was that initially the boat fishermen were catching more than the bank fishermen. We were casting up to the rocks with 1/2 ounce jigs and working the bait back to the boat slowly and on the bottom. We caught a few trout near the top of the dam, but in that water there was a lot of big mullet, which we hit on almost every cast, and occasionally even foul hooked some. Most of the trout we caught away from the rocks in what was probably 15 to 20 foot of water. Feeding is all about energy efficiency for trout, and since they typically feed in moving water, they have to choose an area where they don't have to exert too much energy fighting the current, but are still positioned to capture bait with a lunge. Fortunately, they are well built for efficient swimming in moving water. Yeah, that's good, 18 inch. The bank fishermen were casting out into 20 to 25 foot water and working up the bottom against the flow, with some success, but less than the boat fishermen. I think one disadvantage they had was that the drag on their line in the current would have pushed it up and lifted the lure. My guess is that their bait was spending most of its time too far above the heads of the trout. However, their success changed when the water flow began to drop off. In those resulting conditions, I think they began to catch trout at a 2-to-1 ratio over the boat fishermen. Little guys. The bank fishermen are catching 16 inchers. Why did this happen? My theory is tied to assumptions about hydrodynamic changes. With less current flow through the dam, the trout would be able to move around more freely without expending too much energy. Therefore, they could feed higher in the water column and closer to the top of the dam. In those conditions, the bank fishermen's baits may have spent more time in the strike zone than the baits thrown from the boats.
Y'all do any good?
Is that a good
Yeah.
day? Yeah, we left them hit.
Right here?
Yeah.
They on the bottom?
Yeah. Real slow. It's a real slow release.
Plastic?
Yep, plastic, a matrix, green
all
hornet.
that.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
So the next time you're in that situation where your bite has slowed down or maybe stopped completely, try fan casting around in your area. You may find that the trout have just made a micro move. And if it is wintertime or late fall and you may be fishing along a channel, make sure that you can fish the shallow side as well as the deep side effectively. If you're fishing live bait, I would recommend a Carolina rig with a clip-on cork above the sliding weight so that you can cast over to the shallow water, maybe near the rocks, but also take the cork off and cast out into the deep water and fish that effectively as well. Hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you have anybody you think who would also appreciate this video, give them a share. And please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. But most of all, take Jesus' advice and cast on the other side.